first and foremost, thank you very much for joining me today. It's a pleasure
Pleasure.
to get to see you.
No problem whatsoever. It's a pleasure to be here.
Cool. So firstly, just for my audience, could you just say what dates you were at SOAS for?
Sure. I studied Arabic and history from 2000 and actually I started in 2006. It's an interesting story, but I did the degree from 2007 to 2011, and then I was president of the union from 2011 to 2012. So I spent quite a bit of time there.
Right. So you would have seen a lot of Arabic students go through the mix of them.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, nice. So actually, in that case, you would have been at SOAS before the war in Syria started, then, like in 2011. Where did you do your year abroad?
In Damascus,
wow.
in Syria.
That was something that dawned on me. Like as I was looking on your LinkedIn at like the dates that you were there, I thought, SubhanAllah, you're actually one of the legendary generations that were able to go to Damascus, because we missed out on that.
It was most certainly it was game changing for me, in not just for my degree, but also personally as well. I had to say that I intended to study Arabic because I wanted to study language, I wanted to study psychology, I wanted to study, maths and music, I wanted to study almost everything under the sun, and of course politics, economics, etc. And it just occurred to me that the only way, at least in the UK, one gets the opportunity to feel like they're approaching all those things in one fell swoop is, forgive me.
Take it if you need to.
No, that's quite all right. I'll in fact, let me switch that off so that I can start the thing again, because
no worries.
So so I was in Damascus in 2009 to 2010, so it was before the war, and it did change my not just my degree, but my life in general. I'd actually gone to study Arabic because I wanted to study English literature, I want to study language, I want to study philosophy. I did 18 plays in 5 years when I was a teenager. I was a music scholar, and I had a real desire to try and understand what is at the root of the universe before I go out into the universe. And I must admit, I didn't approach it with any semblance of a spiritual meaning or desire in that framework. I come from a background that appreciates and respects Islam in particular, but that wasn't the core driver for me. For me, it was something more transcendental. It just seemed to be something that drew me as a way to be able to understand everything. I really enjoyed problem solving, so I wanted to do something logical, but I also was a poet, so I really wanted to do something expressive, and there was no way to find anything to study, at least in the UK, that fulfilled all those things together. And so suddenly Arabic came along as an idea, and I thought, okay, well, not only will I enjoy it, I'll be able to use it, and I found it really tough. I started in 2006. I didn't know what I was in for, and actually in 2006 I actually dropped out. I thought, this is really, really difficult. And something inside me said, you can go to Edinburgh, Leeds, St. Andrews, Durham, have a really good time, study sociology or something, and have a pretty cushy life. But there's something that's drawing you to this. There's something really deep inside you that is magnetic, and it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be a hell of a ride. And so I came back, and I importantly, practically sort of fulfilled, I guess, both elements of both sides of my brain by mixing Arabic with history. So, one side of my mind that was doing a lot of the things you have to do in the first few years of Arabic at SOAS, which is very logical and very sort of, it's a bit like studying physics. And I refer to it as the quantum mechanics of emotion. That's what Arabic is. It's the quantum mechanics of emotion. And you have to get there by starting by doing 1 + 1 is 2 again and again, and again, all the way up to quantum mechanics. So that was, difficult, and it was frustrating. But finally, I got to go to Damascus. And I can imagine, after not being allowed, not really allowed, but not being able really to speak the language at SOAS, so excited. I had arrived back then, BMI, British Middle East, to fly to Damascus. This was Syria in days when everyone thought this was, going to be one of the future states of the Middle East, and you know, the leader was talking about Damascus being a massive Wi-Fi zone, and so everything was really positive and such. And I was like, wow, okay, well, you know, it's a different time to what it is now. But I remember landing in 2009 and thinking, wow, I'm here. I'm in Damascus. I'm in Syria. I'm in like this. It's a bit like Narnia, but real. You know, it's like all of history just suddenly plunked in one place. And I come out of the airport with my bags and my Hans Ver dictionary under my arm. And I'm like, I'm going to use my Arabic. So I knocked on the taxi driver's window. And there's this sort of rather rotund guy in a white sort of vest, about 1 o'clock in the morning, with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. And he doesn't really turn towards me. He just kind of rolls down the window and then just kind of flicks his head a little bit as if to say, okay, you have my attention. And I go, عفوا يا أستاذ أريد أن أذهب إلى المدينة القديمة.
Yeah.
And he just sits there and he turns around, looks at me, goes, sure. Get my hands around. What does shoe mean? What does shoe?
Yeah.
So for anyone who hasn't studied Arabic yet, it's a bit like turning up at Heathrow Airport at 1 o'clock in the morning and going, forsooth, kind sir, wouldst thou takest me to the old town of Mayfair, if thou pleasest, you know? So yeah. it was a bit of a turn up for the books. But when I was in Damascus and I was in Syria, as a guy who's been born and brought up in the UK with multiple sort of backgrounds and who considers himself, you know, a citizen of the world and tries to apply love to everything, there was no better place for me to find my grounding sort of spiritually than through a city where 1 minute on a Monday evening, I'd be learning Arabic through, you know, a poetry club that used to exist there called Beit Qasid. Right. And that's how I learned, you know, my Arabic, not just in terms of Uridu an adhaba, but in terms of like Zidini, Ishqan Zidini, you know, the resonance of the beauty of this language that makes it the quantum mechanics of emotion. And it's not just Damascus. This is, you know, a phenomenal part of Sharq al-Awsat. It's a big part of the grounding that does magnetize people towards that part of the world again and again, sadly, for better and for worse. And, you know, there is nothing more empowering, I think, in the times that we find ourselves in, than to actually be able to arm yourself a little bit with reason and logic in the form of language, yeah, which is being abused left, right, and center.
So obviously you mentioned that you've got a variety of interests, right? The thing that I agree with you about learning languages is you get to, the language isn't necessarily just a topic in itself. It's the medium through which you learn about lots of different things, right? So it does accommodate lots of different interests. And so if we go back to your first year, what did your modules look like? Because I kind of want to give an idea of the structure of what a degree program looks like to people out there might be considering it. Like in my case, I did straight Arabic. Yeah. Well, I actually started with Arabic and Islamic studies, but you know, I didn't have the right mindset or expectations for Islamic studies at SOAS. Like I'd kind of studied Islam before I went there, and I'd kind of studied like, these are the 5 pillars, these are the key beliefs and stuff. And then I get there and it's like an Orientalist kind of criticism of Islam, if you know what I mean. So I decided to switch to straight Arabic. So my modules were, 3 of my 4 modules were just learning, having Fusha beaten into me all day. And then one of the modules was Arabic culture, I think I did. But what did that look like for you? What did that first year look like for you?
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, before I go into that, it's important to note that you're absolutely right. It's very easy to go into, you know, studying these things at SOAS with expectations already set, right? Everyone does it, which is why, for example, there is such a high dropout rate in first year Arabic, because it's very, you know, it's very difficult to know what to expect when you're going off to study something which, you know, frankly, have minimal exposure to before you decide to go and study it. Same with Chinese, by the way. It's not just Arabic. Chinese has a huge dropout rate as well. You know, it's a very lovely sort of halcyon idea of, I'm going to go and study Arabic, and then you're in the thick of it, and it's really difficult. Or Islamic studies or history, you know, and it's really, really important to take that time early on to find out what it is you resonate with and why, because that process of getting to know yourself is phenomenally important, far more important in my opinion than you know, the actual degree you come out with. But nonetheless, what did my first year look like? When I was studying straight Arabic, there were 4 modules, and it was, you know, 3 modules of Fusha, and then one module of sort of general Arabic culture. Now, when I switched to Arabic and history, it how did it go? Yes, it would. So what would happen is you do 3 modules of Arabic and 1 module of, you know, your other degree, so
Yeah, that
history.
was the same then, yeah.
And then your second year you do 2 and 2. It's split, and then you have your year abroad. You come back, and it's 3 of your, you know, your other module, and then 1 of Arabic, right?
Okay.
So that's the way it would work. And the choices, you don't really have choices in your first year. You have to do the sort of mandatory courses that are there. And then in your second year, you start to get a little bit more choice in terms of how you want to focus yourself a little bit. But it's once you've done your year abroad, like when you come back, then you can go and focus, you know, a little bit more. So I did the best. I really struggled, by the way. And I got a 2-1 in the end, but my first and second year, I really struggled. It was very difficult. Once I came back from my year abroad, I got a ridiculously high mark in my Arabic. Yeah, alhamdulillah, I got a ridiculously high mark in my Arabic module. I did politics and aesthetics in modern Arabic literature.
Okay.
You know, absolutely amazing. So as in, you know, I was literally able at that stage to be able to use my Arabic to look at the nuances, the vibrationary nuances in the works of Yusuf Idris, right? In looking at that as a mechanism to understand the true story of what was happening in Egypt at the time. Or with, you know, Nizar Qabani or Mahmoud Darwish, etc., using artistry to get a real phenomenal knowledge through the actual, you know, nuktas, through the bits of the words chosen deliberately for their feel, to be able to represent something that people couldn't say explicitly at the time for political reasons, right? So it takes a while, and it does take those skeleton building blocks in your first year, and you do need to go through it. It's like going to the gym. You know, you need to go through these moments where you humble yourself and you humble your ego by almost, you know, neurally practicing again and again, like a musical instrument. You have to practice to get to a place where suddenly there's a muscle memory with this language. And at times in my life since my degree, there are times where I haven't been able to use Arabic, or not haven't been able, but haven't really had the opportunity to, or the need to. But so long as there is a stable baseline that is created through those years, you're able to go back to it quite quickly. Yeah. And that's why it's so phenomenally important.
Yeah, that's what I've definitely found that. Like, obviously I graduated with straight Arabic in the end, and I went into primary school teaching. I did take the Teach First program, but I was terrible at it, and I left just to teach Arabic. Like, it was all I wanted to do, really. So yeah, but I've definitely found, I've been in the UK for most of that time, and I've found you kind of get out of practice of speaking, right, for example, but like it doesn't take very long. You know, it really doesn't take very long for me to put myself in some conversations and stuff and just be back to, because I actually studied in Nablus when I did my year. I went to Palestine because I know a lot of people who were in my year who joined that program at SOAS because they wanted to go to Damascus, but then it wasn't available for us. But by the time it came around to us in our third year, it was either Nablus or Amman. Those are the 2 options available. And Alexandria did open up halfway through the year, so we did have a couple of options. But so for you, was it Damascus or Alexandria?
It was Damascus and Alexandria, and the year after that was Alexandria stopped being an option, and then the cohort in Damascus had to leave early. And then after that, it was a cohort who, I think it was at Birzeit, who or one of the universities. I can't remember where, but eventually it was Nablus. I remember that. But that's the thing. I think it's very important to note, as you just said there, where you go is important, but at the end of the day, also making sure you make the most out of your time there is phenomenal. So I actually, you know, I must admit, the University of Damascus was fine, but I didn't really learn a huge amount there. How I learned, I got a job. I don't think I was meant to under my visa, but I helped set up Syria's first English language daily newspaper. And so I was a journalist there. Now that put me in places where I was exposed enough to have to speak Arabic, and it wasn't a safe cushy classroom setup. It was a case of, you know, going to people's houses and offices and going and actually using investigative work, using that Arabic in that situation. Loads of really embarrassing memories, which I have shut down straight to the back of my head. But as a result of those, I was put in positions where the pressure existed to go and actually learn the Arabic. And that's really important. So you can be in Amman And you can have a really, really nice time with a lot of the expats out there, and a lot of the Jordanians and Palestinians out there who, speak English on a daily basis. There's some great restaurants, there's some, great places to go, art places and Jebel Webde, etc. All fun. But at the end of the day, it's your agency and it's your choice how much you want to use it. And that applies, I guess, for anywhere you choose to go across the Middle East if you do your abroad there.
Yeah, that's definitely something to with a lot of my students, like in terms of my students and my audience, they're mostly adults who consider going back to university to do an Arabic language degree. It's often people have sort of the budget for it, and they want to take it really seriously. And there's certainly some things that people need to be advised on making the most out of not just taking the opportunity, but making the most out of it. Like something I noticed on my year abroad in Palestine is like I'm not from a Muslim background, by the way. I embraced Islam when I was about 18. And when I went to Nablus, that was I sort of had one conversation for the first few months. Everyone just wanted to know how I became a Muslim, and I became really good at just telling people how I became a Muslim. But it's a really important onus that a student needs to take on themselves to make sure they have a variety of different kinds of conversations. Like even if you need to prepare yourself for it and be in different environments and things like that, or else you can very easily be very fluent in a very narrow part of speaking.
100%. The amount of times that I've had to explain that I'm half Indian, half Pakistani, but my heart is Syrian, I can say it in my sleep, right? Like, and it's one of those things. Your circumstance will have to push you to say it. I didn't get away because of the way I look as well. I couldn't get away with the idea especially in Syria, where they're like, hold on. You're Pakistani, but you speak English. It wasn't. There were places which hadn't quite developed an understanding of the history of globalization in the last 100 years. But like that meant, okay, well, in that circumstance, use it as an opportunity and widen your field. I think times have changed quite a bit though as well. I mean, bear in mind when I was out there, the iPhone had been sort of mass released after the time I came back from Syria, right? So like, only a few people had it before. Then now smartphones are everywhere. And so sort of knowledge is far more disseminated. Expectations have changed therefore as well. And so it is important, especially if you're an adult returning back to studies, to be incredibly discerning and really use your agency rather than sort of ride the wave. Go out and choose and plan to go and make the very most out of your studying. Also, there is the truth that, returning to studies, as I've done, at later age as well, sometimes your neural flexibility is very different to when you're trying to study language at a younger age. And so that's not really an excuse. All it is a case of managing that, saying, okay, well, how will I best learn a language at a later stage once I've developed habit, right, in life? I know now that I wake up at X time. I know now that I eat at X time. I know now that I work between X time and X time, etc. Your life becomes quite habitual. To open that up into the chaos of language learning, which is this beautiful fluidity, requires a management exercise, especially when it comes to something like Arabic as well, where it's not a case of, hello, how are you? I went to school today. It's a case of understanding things to a very deep scientific level in terms of how each and every deliberate sound is created by each and every deliberate letter. Only through then are you going to be able to use it with the fluency you desire to use it. So it is an expectation setting exercise, but like anything, if you plan it properly, you can come out with it with some amazingly gratifying rewards.
I wanted to ask about something. So before you joined SOAS, did you come from like a languages background? Like was that what you studied at college for your A levels and stuff before you did your degree?
I was very lucky to have studied in an environment where as I say, I did a lot of theatre. I did 18 plays in 5 years, but I was a music scholar. I think that was the most fundamental thing. I think interesting enough, being born and brought up in the UK and being the eldest child, my parents insisted on speaking to me in Urdu.
Okay.
Between the age of 0 and 3, knowing full well as soon as I'd hit nursery school, I'd start speaking English. And so I guess the sort of flexibility I had with language happened at an early age. And I kind of think of everything as a form of music, right? So I think of languages in particular, their ebbs, their flows, their representations of vibration, the way a human being expresses themselves it is a form of, a type of music. And so I think I was lucky enough to be able to approach languages from that mindset, right? So if I was to go off and try and study Korean, I wouldn't study it from the basis of, hello, hi, my name is Ali. What I'd look at is say, okay, well, what are the core notes of that language? What are the core, like, elemental, letters and grammatical, how does it work? Like, how do people think when they're speaking that language? And that's a bit like, sort of, if I was going to learn how to play the clarinet, which I can't play, I'd think, okay, rather than going ba 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 ba, I'd say, okay, how does this instrument work? What exactly is going on here? How does the air go through it? How does, and so I look at things from that basis, and then sort of, be able to apply the, I'm a lawyer now, right? So that's how I apply the law as well. I kind of look at things from the perspective, not of, you can do X, you can't do Y, but what's the actual meaning and philosophy behind it? What is the mindset that creates that environment, or creates that particular thinking behind that rule? Yeah. So in other words, I don't think it's completely necessary for you to come from that sort of linguistic background in order to find languages easy. I certainly didn't find languages easy. It's a case of knowing how your mind works well enough to say, what is my point of access into understanding how to approach this great big universe called a language, right? And it's about, that's why learning languages helps you know yourself so much more.
That's really interesting you came to there, because my next question was going to be about if you noticed in your first year a difference between how well students adapted to Arabic depending on what they'd done before. Like, some of the best performing Arabic students in our first year, especially when everything's so technical, were some of the people in our year who had done maths and physics and chemistry. Whereas, like, some people like myself who came from more of a languages background, like at A level, I did, more kind of humanities and stuff. I did studies of religion, English literature, Spanish and stuff. I thought that I was in a very strong position, whereas, it's interesting how people from these backgrounds that would sort of seem unexpected to a lot of people took to Arabic so well. It was especially in the first year. And I wondered if you noticed that, like, sometimes students who do Arabic and economics sometimes have a mind that's really good for it, surprisingly.
Oh, absolutely. It's interesting because I think there is something to be said about, there are various ways of learning language, not just through a degree, right? And a university degree does naturally suit the economists, the physicians, the biologists, the people who approach knowledge from, a rule-based approach to then be able to express themselves with those rules. And inevitably, I guess you probably felt the same, that once you suffered through the rules and managed to just pass the exams, you're then able to express yourself as the expressive person you are with those rules. But I certainly, I barely passed my first year. Right. I just about passed my second year, but I still got my high 2-1, because by the time I kind of learned how to express myself where it counts in the third and fourth year, it was there, so it's, again, expectation. Don't go into this if you're a perfectionist, for God's sake. No, absolutely not. This is, again, one of those things where it was, the spiritual journey of studying a language like this is, it humbles you. If you're the sort of perfectionist that needs to have A grades, study the language some other way. Try Duolingo or something. But if you really want to challenge yourself spiritually, deeply, no matter what your spiritual basis or background is, there's nothing more challenging and humbling than to basically be turned into a baby again, right? You're learning how to express yourself from the very, very beginning. It does change you. That journey does change you inside.
Yeah, I think, so to end then, I don't want to take up too much of your time. There was something, kind of a core question to this whole episode, really, that, so why, if you wanted to learn Arabic, why did you choose a degree rather than doing some other kind of course or self-studying or whatever? Why a degree specifically?
Honestly, at the time, it was because a degree seemed to be the thing to have.
Okay.
If you were going to ask me now, would I go back and study Arabic if I knew all I knew but hadn't studied it as a degree? I would say yes, but I'd say yes for very different reasons. I would say yes to going and studying Arabic on the basis that I have a deep desire. If I had all the time and money in the world, frankly, I'd spend a lifetime doing this, but a deep desire to understand how that mind, the quantum mechanics of that emotion works, right? And so, like, as if like some people going to study a master's after working, right? You know, they've seen the world enough. They understand how it works on a real level, and they understand that, you know, you've got to do what you love and you want. And what a master's can do, or indeed an undergraduate degree at this stage can do, is give you a lifestyle in an environment that you want, right? Take away the idea of, okay, I've now got a degree from SOAS or whatever. Actually, just the idea of spending your daily basis surrounding yourself, ensconcing yourself in learning. You know, there is nothing quite like it. It's extraordinary. It is a privilege. If we're being perfectly honest, it's a privilege that everyone should be able to have. But for those who can go for it, they should go for it. I think that if, however, you're looking to do a degree, especially slightly later, you know, for whatever reason, expecting that this is going to change your life in an economic manner, or going to change your life in, you know, any other manner that you think, without having a clear direction of going to use this to go to the Foreign Office, I'm going to use this to join a bank, I'm going to use this because I want to be an academic. If you're going to think that way, then I think best of luck, because the best laid plans of mice and men, you know, kind of get shattered as you're going into this. But if you're prepared to be quite elastic about the way you want to use it, and your expectations are set to loving it for the moments that you love it, I think it's a phenomenally important thing to do. Not just a nice thing to do, but a very important thing to do, because, you know, you do want that tangible memory. It's not just a course that you could say, okay, I'm going to do it, and I don't like it anymore, so I'm going to go back and work. It's like you're committed, you know, and it's tough to be committed to things these days. That's why I do the degree again.
Yeah, no, I certainly have my own thoughts on that. Like when I think about why I did it, to be honest, I was 18 and I wanted a degree, and I thought I also want to learn Arabic, so let's do both of them at the same time. I mean, yeah. Now, if I was to look back at it from a purely Arabic language knowledge perspective, there are other things that are, especially because now it's much more expensive now. Like my advice to students now has changed a little bit, because it's not like 3,000 a year anymore. It's a lot more than like triple. Yeah. Which is a big factor for most people. So now I'd say, look, you can achieve a really high level of Arabic if you have the freedom and the money to go abroad and study somewhere. Yeah. Like I remember at SOAS, in the prayer room there, I remember meeting some brothers who've been to Egypt for 2 years. Yeah. And like I've just been at SOAS for 2 years. Yeah. And these guys, especially in terms of their spoken Arabic, they're a lot better than me.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sitting there thinking like who's the winner here? You've experienced Egypt for a few years, and I've been in London paying out for everything. But there's other things that they didn't have a degree, but I was, and I had the experience of being in an environment of academia for that time to focus purely on bettering myself intellectually on a number of levels that they didn't. So it's I would say, like, they all work, but it has to be for your own right reasons.
That's the thing. I think do your planning and speak to as many people as possible to get as honest response as you need, because only then you're going to be able to decide what's the best route for you. There are plenty of people I know who dropped out in their first year and are fluent now because they just went and worked in the Middle East. Great. If that was the aim, brilliant. But if my aim, for example, I think through my degree, I ended up not just be able to speak Arabic, but work in Arabic as a lawyer. I helped set up a rather large alternative Arab music brand in Dubai called Wasla, right? And all of that comes from like a deep understanding, not just of the language, but a love of basically the environment of the language, and also the fact that doing it at SOAS gave me exposure to things outside of my little Surrey world, you know, like it gave me the confidence to be able to apply things outside of the box. And so those are all factors that are important when it comes to an undergraduate degree as well. All of that's a whole half an hour chat in its own right. And I think that anyone looking to make that decision, do your research. It's not just a case of I want to study Arabic, therefore I'll study at SOAS. It's like there's an entire research paper that you need to do before being confident with your decision there. Or you can let it go and go with the flow, as they say. Entirely your choice as well.
Great. Well, lastly, I just want to thank you so much for your time. You know, you have to come and give some of your time to us to have a conversation with me about this, but it's going to be very nice to have another face on the YouTube channel and stuff, because the audience usually have to put up with my mug. So I want to thank you very much. There's no kind of special ending. We don't fade to black. There's no round of applause or anything. So I just bid you farewell and say assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. A pleasure, and best of luck to everyone who's watching this.